Kurt Burrows said he was aware of the $1 million hit that Diddy had allegedly put on Suge and Tupac. Keefe D, we know, has confessed to being involved in the murder in his book, On the Art of Dialogue, on Vlad and other platforms, but has since recanted and pointed the finger at Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., the former head of security of Death Row, who had testified before the grand jury that ultimately indicted Keefe D in the murder of Tupac. Who's telling the truth? And who's lying? Let's get into some of this straight game.
Life is like those cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy DELRAY Richardson, Platinum Artist, Platinum Songwriter, Straight Game TV. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Do me a favor, click on the thumbs up button. Also subscribe to the channel. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video. I'm going to get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, there have been some bombshells this week in regards to the murder of Tupac Shakur. Like I said in the intro, Kurt Burrows just filed a lawsuit against Diddy, basically claiming to know about the $1 million hit that was put on Tupac and Suge, basically saying that Diddy had got rental cars for some guys from Harlem to drive out to New York. He also mentioned Von Zip, the person who Keefe D said he had got the gun from to ultimately shoot Tupac Shakur. From that perspective, more importantly, Keefe D did a jailhouse interview from which we some of us know anyway. That basically he's saying now that Reggie Wright Jr., the former head of security, was the person who orchestrated and was the mastermind behind the murder of Tupac Shakur and what Reggie Wright Jr. stood to gain. From that perspective, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. Was one of the people, like I said, one of the first people to go and testify in front of the grand jury, basically saying that, you know, Keefe D and the people that he were affiliated with was the ones who were responsible for the hit on Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. But let me give you this. I'm going to show you an atmosphere of what had led up to that. And I told you guys from watching my channel, but I'm going to give you the when you get into the factual aspect of it, not what people are saying, trying to blame somebody, because Keefe D will have to articulate a little bit more than just the guy who, you know, is your number one witness is the guy who was responsible. He will have to articulate a little bit more than that in order to beat these murder charges that he's facing, because he articulated a whole lot in his book on various platforms to his involvement in the murder. So he's going to have to be as vocal and as detailed as he was in him basically saying what his involvement was as he is as into alleging anybody else's involvement. I think the TV, the jailhouse interview was interesting. But like I said, once again, he's going to have to give a little bit more than that. And like I said, they say they have private investigators and all of that. But let's get into this. Check this out. So, ladies and gentlemen, now, right here, Keefe D's now saying he did not write the memoir. I don't think that's going to work, because he's basically said in his interviews that, you know, it's his memoir and so on and so forth. On Vlad. Everything was there is the truth and so on and so forth. So these are the uphill battles that he has to face based on his own testimony against himself. He said he was fed information by police, right? Basically saying that Greg Kading had fed him information in regards to that, right? And then him implicating now, indicating that Reggie Wright Jr., like I said, was involved with the assassination and the orchestration of the assassination of Tupac Shakur, right? So now, Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie the Rat, basically has denied involvement and said it bothers me because I was in charge of possibly protecting this young man, meaning Tupac Shakur. That couldn't be further from the truth, and I'm going to show you right now, and I'm going to give you that evening as far as Frank Alexander, what he was saying, who was there, who wasn't there, and how it happened, and the things that were going on behind the scenes that even some of the people that were working that night didn't know about, right? So let's do it like this. Listen, there was a meeting that day where they were told not to carry guns for whatever reason. They were told not to carry guns, whether it was they couldn't carry guns because they weren't licensed in Vegas, whether they didn't have certain permits, whether certain paperwork wasn't submitted, whatever reason you can think about, that's what they were told. But listen, they had a meeting. Frank came in off a vacation. Frank Alexander, who would be guarding Tupac that night, along with someone else. Reggie had said that it was Kevin Hackey, but I want you to pay attention to this. Reggie said it was Kevin Hackey, and Kevin Hackey hadn't arrived in Vegas yet. Listen. So after the meeting that they had about the weapons and whatever it was they were talking about, after the meeting, we caught a ride with Reggie. This is Frank Alexander saying, we caught a ride with Reggie. He took us out to lunch to TGI Fridays. When we finished eating, Reggie started bitching about Kevin Hackey, the bodyguard who replaced me when I was on vacation. So this is Frank's first night back, right? In Vegas, he gonna be guarding Tupac. They'd gotten into it over money. Kevin, who had worked with Reggie long before he hooked up with Suge to form Right Way, when they were both policing the streets of Compton, managed to hook up something with the producers of Gang Related, the movie Pac was working on in August, right? Right around the time that Tupac had fired Reggie as being his company, as being his personal security, not the security for Tupac, but his personal security, saying that Kevin Hackey had got paid $10,000 for offering his technical advice on the shooting scenes. Reggie felt Kevin had undermined his authority by taking the 10 grand and still taking money from Right Way for bodyguarding Pac. In my opinion, Frank Alexander saying basically Kevin took what he deserved. So now there's this meeting about the guns, about not having them, about all of these things. Frank Alexander didn't have any communication apparatus, right? I'm going to show you that. So this is 2 times at the meeting, and they also do lunch after, go out to dinner, lunch, or whatever to TGI Fridays afterwards. This is 2 opportunities where the head of security would be able to make sure that everybody has what they should have in order to be working that night, right? But as you can see, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., he's worried more about Kevin Hackey getting $10,000 for actually doing a job outside of what security was, basically helping the people on the set of Gang Related with the shooting scenes, right? So in essence, he's mad. He's actually mad about that. But listen, check it out now. So after that, Tupac, right? He gets into Vegas. Frank and them meet up. So listen. So they're at the Luxor gambling. Tupac was like, he was losing. So Tupac wanted to go to the MGM Grand. So what do? They walked over. And so this starts off where people are watching Tupac win money now that they're at the MGM Grand. Better place for a high roller gangster to be seen rolling high than in Vegas at the craps table. I started tensing up because everyone was looking to get in his face, meaning Tupac. Now here is very important. Michael Moore, this is way before the fight. This is before the fight, and Tupac and them walked over to the MGM Grand. Michael Moore had walked with us from the Luxor, and he had Pac flanked on one side, right? Listen, he had Pac flanked on one side, and I had the other. The outlaws were staggering throughout the crowd, spread out, so people wouldn't know who they were, right? So I want you to pay attention to that because we're gonna come back to that. So, you know, Michael Moore on one side of Tupac, right? And Frank actually on the other side of Tupac. This is before the fight. They walk from the Luxor over to the MGM Grand. You know, Frank feels, you know, he felt a little bit more secure now that, you know, everything's good. So check this out now. I'm going to show you what was going on behind the scenes that Frank didn't know about and nobody actually knew about. This goes to show the negligence and the criminal negligence that I say of Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. You got to understand what I'm about to show you, right? So now, Michael Moore's with him right now, and Frank's on one side, Michael Moore's on the other, Tupac at the crap table gambling, and he went, and Frank said he won about $1,400 to $2,000 at that particular time, right? Okay, now, so, I'm going to start from I Need It, right? Listen, so, at the time, listen to me, basically, check this out. I needed a phone to check in with Reggie in case Suge was looking for him. And the typo they put, it was a typo. So basically, Frank is saying I needed to check in with Reggie to see if Suge was looking for Pac and wanted to know where Pac at. He basically saying he always wanted to know where Tupac was at all times. That's basically what they're saying, with a few typos, I guess, from the interview, the typos, right? And Frank is saying now, the fucked up thing was, I didn't have my security staff Mo's cell phone while I was on vacation. Kevin Hackey, used it, and since he and Reggie were fighting, remember about the $10,000 and all of that earlier, right? I didn't have it on me because Kevin wasn't coming to Vegas. I couldn't believe I'm rolling around with Death Row's $1 Million Boy, one of the biggest rap stars in the world, and I got to use a payphone. I must have left him for about a minute long enough to leave Reggie a message from a public phone a couple of feet away. Making my way back to the table, Tupac wasn't there. Okay, now listen. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Frank Alexander talking about he had to use a payphone. Mind you, he was with Reggie earlier that day. At that meeting, Reggie knew that Frank was going to be on Pac, right? At the lunch, Reggie knew Frank was going to be on Pac, right? Okay. Michael Moore was also with Frank and Tupac at the MGM while they were gambling. So listen to this now, so you get it. And it doesn't dawn on Reggie neither time. This is not the first time. Listen, it doesn't dawn on Reggie neither time to get get Frank Alexander what he needs, right? Listen, check it out. So now, this is Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. talking in the interview that I found, right? And his explanation to this is, who would have thought a big celebrity could be murdered on the Vegas Strip, Wright Jr. added. Over the years, some rap fans have put the blame on Wright Jr. for Tupac's death. They always write that Tupac should have had security guards sitting either side of him, but he had no fear and would have never agreed to that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read that one more time. Because if you point back to what he said, they always write that Tupac should have had security guards sitting either side of him, but he had no fear. He would have never agreed to that. Correct? Isn't that what that says? Okay, now let's go back here. I'm sorry. Right? This is Frank from the MGM Grand when him and Michael Moore earlier that evening. Reggie is saying long after the fact that Tupac would have never agreed to have security flanked side by side. Frank said, I started tensing up because every one was looking to get in his face, meaning Tupac, while he was at the crap table. Michael Moore had walked with us from the Luxor, and he had Pac flank on one side, and I had the other side. Remember when Suge said I had two of the best guys for Tupac? Suge was talking about Michael Moore and Frank Alexander. And Frank said Michael Moore had him flanked on one side and I had the other, right? So we know for a fact the Monday morning quarterbacking by Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. But listen to this. Now it came time for them to go to the fight. So they go to the fight. Once they go to the fight, now listen. So they go to the fight. Here it is again. Reggie saying, who would have thought a big celebrity would be murdered on the Las Vegas Strip? Wright Jr. added. Over the years, some rap fans have put the blame on Wright Jr. for Pac's death. They always write that Tupac should have had security guards sitting either side of him, but he had no fear and would have never agreed to that. We know that's a fact based on what Frank is saying. But listen to this. I'm going to show you a picture now. This is a couple of days before. This is a couple of days before at the VMAs, at the MTV Video Music Awards. You see Tupac, the reporter was asking Tupac about all of his jewelry. What does Tupac have in his hand? He has a walkie-talkie in his hand, don't he? Right? As you see, over Tupac's, that would be his left shoulder, is Michael Moore. Michael Moore has an earpiece in his ear. We know Snoop and the whole 9 yards. Now, once again, there were two security guards on Tupac that night. But more importantly, do you see the security apparatus that Tupac has? That radio. So he can get in touch with anybody. Tupac had no radio in Vegas. Frank Alexander had no radio or earpiece like Michael Moore has right here in New York, in Vegas. Do you see what I'm telling you? It was set up that way. Frank didn't have a radio. They had two meetings, two opportunities to give it to him. But listen to this, right? Now, when it's time to go to the fight, remember, Frank was the only person on Tupac, right? So what Frank didn't know what's going on behind the scenes, because remember, when they walked over to the MGM Grand earlier when Tupac was gambling, you seen, in fact, Michael Moore had Tupac flanked on the one side, Frank had him on the other side. But when it was time for the fight, you heard from Tim, the guy who was Michael Moore's roommate, that Reggie had called Michael Moore and pulled Michael Moore off of Tupac. But Michael Moore was with Tupac early in that evening when they went over to the MGM Grand when he was gambling, when Frank had lost him. So Frank had got lost, but Michael Moore was still with him when they went back over to the back over to the Luxor, because that's where Frank ultimately ran to Tupac at when he went back over to the Luxor. It was like, oh, Pac, where you at? He said Pac walked up behind him. But what you have to understand, it's time to go to the fight. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. said he had a ticket, but he didn't go. Who has a ticket to a fight that doesn't go to the fight? Reggie knew what he was doing. He pulled the security. He pulled Michael Moore off for Tupac. Guess what? Frank didn't even know. Frank didn't know, right, what was going on. And Tupac actually had Frank call Reggie again and ask him, where's Michael Moore at? You get it? But then Reggie would then come out and say years later, he would say years later, this would be the excuse that he would give years later. He would say, what did he say? What did he say? They always write that Tupac should have had a security guard sitting either side of him. But he had no fear and would never have agreed to that. That's not true, because in fact, Tupac had what? Tupac had that earlier. He had that earlier that evening with Michael Moore and Frank Alexander with him at the MGM. See, Reggie didn't know about that. So he proceeded years later to tell a lie and acted as if Tupac wouldn't wanted 2 securities on him. We know that's a lie too, based on the fact when he was in New York, he had a radio. What, he had a radio? Huh? Did he have a radio on him? Tupac had the radio in his hand so he could communicate, right? Michael Moore had the radio in his ear. He could communicate. And he wasn't the only one. Remember, Frank was on vacation. It was 2 people on Tupac in New York that night. Probably 3, right? Security was tight. But look what Tupac got in his hand. So you can see the difference, the stark contrast in what happened in Vegas to what happened at the MTV Video Music Awards. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. is complicit in the death of Tupac Shakur by way of criminal negligence. He intentionally pulled the security off of Tupac Shakur. He couldn't pull Frank Alexander off of Tupac Shakur because Tupac had requested Frank be his bodyguard, his on-site bodyguard at all times. Frank was on vacation, so you see Michael Moore the week before or a couple of days before in New York, Michael Moore had Tupac, right? So it wasn't strange that Michael Moore would ever work with Tupac from that perspective, right? But think about it. When they go to the MGM Grand, Michael Moore is nowhere to be seen. But then the guy, Tim, who was Michael Moore's roommate, who was also Death Row Security, testified on Reggie the Rat Wright Jr.'s and Gullible John's Bums First YouTube channel, right? They got Tim to come in and talk on the phone. And Gullible John, with Reggie on the phone, asked him, so what happened? You know, and Tim said, well, Michael Moore was pissed. He was pissed that Reggie had pulled him off of Tupac and told Michael Moore not to carry his gun. And Gullible John asked Tim, he said, well, Tim, where were you in the vicinity to be able to hear the conversation that was going on? And Tim said, well, there was a phone call. I wasn't privy to what was being said on the phone call from the other person on the phone. He said, but when Michael Moore got off the phone, he was pissed because Reggie was pulling him off of Tupac. And he was also pissed because Reggie told him not to carry his gun. Now, Frank Alexander's not knowing none of this. He doesn't know about anything. As a matter of fact, Tupac and Frank even said Tupac thought that, you know, he was going to be working with him that night. That was Tupac, what Tupac was under the impression of, because remember, they were at the MGM Grand a few hours ago, and Flink right, Flink left, right? Yeah. So Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. now, years later, does this interview and said, oh no, Tupac would have never liked that. He was fearless. Now he's into Tupac's mind and how Tupac felt instead of doing his job. But not even instead of doing his job, he had been fired as Tupac's personal security. In and around at the same time, he's mad at Kevin Hackey in August 27th, to be exact, 1996. Reggie wanted revenge against Tupac. Reggie wanted to create the environment in which he did around Tupac and where Tupac ultimately suffered what he suffered. He pulled Michael Moore off. Frank didn't know. They get to the MGM Grand. Tupac wondering, you know, this is the time of the fight now, you know, later on. Tupac wondering, they leave in a cab. Tupac wondering, yo, where Michael Moore at? And he tells Frank Alexander once again, yo, call Reggie and find out where Michael Moore at. But Reggie had already known. He pulled him off of him. And like Frank Alexander said, I'm with the $1 Million Boy for Death Row Records. And I got to use a payphone to call the head of security, who he had a meeting with earlier that evening and also went to lunch with to TGI Fridays. And there was no attempt to get Frank any kind of communication apparatus at all. None. Zero. And he knew that he would be on Death Row's $1 million boy. He was pissed that Tupac had fired him personally from using his company as his personal security. As a matter of fact, once again, I keep telling you, this is how it's all related. Suge Knight said what? I had 2 of the best guys for Tupac that night. But what? But Reggie pulled them off of him. Suge said it didn't have to happen like that. I called the club and asked for 5 more guys for Tupac. And they sent nobody. Reggie knew. He knew. Your boy DELRAY, straight gang.